Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Filled with Less show.
We are so happy to be back here with you. I think the month went by pretty quickly, don't you, Cynthia?
It did, extremely quickly, but it's summer, and summer goes
by
quickly.
Absolutely. So what have you been thinking about this month, working on?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about happiness, and I know you have too, because it's really been on our hearts. In our community, we've been hearing a lot about people who just feel like the joy is not in their lives right now, and they're not happy. And last month we had Barbara Pappas on. She talked about how joy comes from who we are in Christ, and happiness is more circumstantial. And then recently I interviewed Phoebe Fedorchak on her book called Putting Joy into Practice, and it was excellent. And I really learned some things from her and wanted to bring that to the community, so we actually featured in our membership in July how to be happier, and I think we had some great conversations.
Yeah, we sure did. And I've been thinking, obviously, since we've been working on this together, I just wanted to share a couple of things that this month for me really helped with my perspective on happiness. So I would say the first one would be that podcast with Phoebe. I finally got around to listening to it just this last weekend. I'd been wanting to, and I had some time, and wow, it was really good. And you know, it's one of those things that there's so many memes of everywhere, inspirational quotes about joy, you know, and it can almost become like white noise after a while.
Absolutely.
This is different. This really had me feeling very encouraged after listening to it, and left me with some takeaways that I could really put into practice. So I really encourage you to give that a listen. The second thing is we are reading in our book club, Hind's Feet on High Places. And that is a book I haven't read in 30 years. Pulled it back out, and oh my gosh, it's so good, right?
So good. So good. In fact, you told me that, I believe you said your mom and dad used to read it to you when you were little.
I feel like we read it, they introduced me to it for sure, because I had to have been like an early teenager maybe, when I first experienced it, and I didn't remember much of anything. I knew the main character's name was Much Afraid. I thought that was, you know, and the Craven Fear was her enemy. So it sounds a little bit like, oh, it's going to be like a children's book, but oh my gosh,
it was not a children's book.
No,
Definitely
I was
not.
weeping. It was so profound. And one of the things that stood out to me from that book was when the main character, Much Afraid, is going on this journey through the valley of this trial and tribulation, and the great shepherd gives her as her companions on this journey sorrow and suffering.
Yes.
And at first she's like horrified, right? Like this is like she's resistant to these being her, you know, they seem so frightening.
Yes, and they're all dressed in black. And
Yes.
you can't see their faces. They have these hoods over them. They're kind of imposing.
Yeah, very imposing. And you know, the shepherd's asking her to trust him. You know, and she's learning to accept that this is what he wants, accept the love he has for her, and accept this. So throughout this journey, she begins to see sorrow and suffering as actually friends.
Yes.
And I think my main takeaway from that, read it. Oh, read it if you can.
Yes. In fact, it's our book club book for August, so you're not behind. It's a small book. You'll be able to get through it, but please join us.
Oh, for our discussion.
For book club, for our discussion, because I think it's going to be a great discussion.
Yes. But what I came away with from both the podcast and the book was the idea of, you know, we often resist things that are hard, like our suffering and sorrow, and that actually causes more anxiety and more pain when if we would kind of lean into it, to let it change us, to embrace it, we actually experience a degree of joy that we may never have had access to previously.
Exactly.
And a joy that really is very independent of what is going on in the world around us.
Yes, and without that sorrow and suffering, I think that one of the morals of the story is that, like you just said, you don't recognize happiness and joy when it comes to you without the sorrow and the suffering. So, like you said, embrace it and lean into it.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the things I really liked from the interview with Phoebe was she talked about what she used to listen to when she woke up in the mornings. And I just wanted to give this for a tip for all of you out there who may not have listened to the podcast yet. She talked about how she used to wake up listening to NPR, and it was right before we went to war. She talked about waking up to that, and that she would actually wake up anxious. And she realized that it was what she was listening to, and the reason she was listening to it was because she felt like she couldn't have too much information, and that had its root in pride. That she had to know everything, and by knowing everything, maybe she could have some control, but although she didn't have any control. But she started feeling anxious just waking up, and so she switched how she woke up in the morning, and she was able to wake up in a better disposition and see happiness right away.
Yeah, yeah. And she talked a lot about how most of the time it's not circumstances, but our passions that are blocking us from joy.
Exactly.
And that is something that we can work on. You know, we talk a lot about controlling the things we can control. And those are things that we can work on, repent of, journal through, get help with.
Exactly.
So, yeah, please give it a listen.
Yes, use all the tools that are available to you in podcasts and books and everything. We think that it will help quite a bit. So one thing that we are also uncomfortable with at times is time, right? Finding peace with time. We either feel like it's being squandered and wasted, or we don't have enough of it. And how do you find that peace? So that's the first thing we're going to be talking about on today's show. Why don't we talk about the lineup we have for you today? First of all, for Peaceful Mind, we are interviewing Dr. Nicole Roccas, and we're going to be talking about having a peaceful, good relationship with time and what that looks like. And then we're going into the Healthy Body segment with Krista Fedorchak, and we're going to be talking to Krista about having a healthy body image and how that's different for Christians and what that looks like. And then last but not least, under Productive Life, we're going to be talking about boredom.
Yeah.
And a lot of people may say, boredom?
Who could be bored?
Who could be bored? I have a list of 100 things I could be doing. Who could be bored? But I think of that like your children too, right? They come to you, Mom, I'm bored.
I don't have a thing to do. But yeah, surprisingly, we do wrestle with it.
We do.
I think in ways that we're not always aware of. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more.
Exactly. So with that, why don't we get into our Peaceful Mind segment?
Dr. Nicole Roccas is a writer, podcaster, and coach in the Toronto area. She has been a contributor to Ancient Faith Radio since 2015 as host of the Time Eternal podcast and blog. Her first book is Time and Despondency, Regaining the Present in Faith and Life, which explores the relationship between human perceptions of time and the spiritual sickness of acedia. In addition to holding her PhD in history from the University of Cincinnati, Dr. Nicole is in the process of becoming certified as a trauma-informed coach. She attends St. Maria of Paris Orthodox Mission in Hamilton, Ontario, and you can find her on Instagram or Twitter or online at NicoleRoccas.com. Hello, Nicole. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So good to have you. It's good to see you again. It's been a while since we've talked.
You too, since the pre-COVID times, I think.
Exactly, pre-COVID.
Yeah. Well, you were high on our list of people that we wanted on the show. And one of the things that was so exciting to me when we were planning the show was just this very opportunity to really just pick the brains of writers, of speakers, of scholars, just people whose works have really impacted us and have been enlightening and truly helpful. And your writings on time have been just that. I know not just for us, but for many people. Yeah. And I guess that's the first question is, what drew you to focus on the subject of time in your work?
I think in a sense I've always been interested in time, even since I was a little kid. But when I did my doctorate in history at the University of Cincinnati, I actually focused on how people in early modern Germany, which is the 16th and early 17th century, how they conceived of the year as a unit of time while the calendar was changing. The new calendar was introduced during that period in Germany as well as throughout much of Europe. And also they were going through a lot of religious and sociocultural shifts that impacted just different cultural attitudes about time. And so I just focused on changing perceptions of the year as a unit of time. And I think that really piqued my interest because it made me realize that even the way we measure time is like culturally contextualized and not necessarily a given. And so then when you add in things like liturgical views of time and other more subjective attitudes towards time, all of it is highly bound up with like our cultural mentality, our personal mentality, the things we've experienced throughout our lives. And it just made me really fascinated. And I was becoming Orthodox, or had become Orthodox shortly prior to that. And my own perception of time was changing as I became more accustomed to living through the liturgical year of the Orthodox Church. And so I just, it kind of just went from there in terms of just my general interest in time.
I know there have been so many people in our community who have mentioned that they love your book, Time and Despondency, and are also using your journal, which I use myself. And of course, we teach how to live simple and more intentional lives in every area of our life. I thought that you'd be a good person to ask, how would you recommend we simplify our time?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that question since you sent it because, in a sense, I mean, it's funny because I do think so much about time, and I have a podcast and these books and all of that. So I probably think about time way more than the average person. But in another sense, like, I feel like I am pretty much just like everybody else in the way that I manage or don't manage my time and try to live meaningfully. And so in terms of recommendations, I don't know that I have any like expert like advice or anything, except some things that I've been recently thinking about. It's always a learning process. And so at any given time, I'm like learning new little things for my own life. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is we talk so much about like time management or like stewarding time. And I think that most of the time, the challenge is actually stewarding our expectations, not so much like the actual raw material of time. Because we actually do have enough time to do the things we need to do. And if we don't, the issue I think is more in terms of what is it that we're actually doing, and are these the things that God has given us to do? Because if we're spending our time doing the things God has given us to do, then there's enough time. But making choices like that is just so difficult because we have our own expectations and we often pay less attention to them. So that's one thing I've been, thinking deeply about recently.
Yeah, and it makes me think about when your introduction, when you're saying, your realization that so much of what we expect of time was more cultural, right? Like, like to me, it's almost like I have to, like an unlearning for me, because I don't realize how much I am influenced by a societal view of time. That I would know if I would have even made that kind of a spiritual leap like you did to see that, but wait a minute, maybe that's not just a given. Maybe we can look at that from a different perspective. Like that's kind of like very eye-opening.
I think one of the ways that we have to be careful, and maybe one of the ways that our view of time is sort of culturally, I don't want to say culturally conditioned, but definitely shaped by the culture around us, is the way that social media and digital media, like the things that it bombards us with in terms of what we think we must be doing. I recently read a really good book called Irresistible, and I always forget the subtitle, but it's about behavioral addiction and the internet. I want to say the author is Adam Alter. And one of the chapters in there that he has is about like goal addiction or like goal obsession, and it has an influence on time. He talks about how, like, for example, on Instagram, we constantly see people completing these random goals, like running for 100 days in a row, like a streak, or you know, like a monthly challenges, or all of these different, which in maybe for individual people, they're good things. But when you see all of these things at once, we feel like we must be doing all of these things. And we sign on to Instagram, maybe wanting to connect with somebody or whatever. We just cleaned our house. We just said our prayers, whatever. We feel like we have completed some responsibility that God has given us for that moment. And as soon as we're on Instagram or Facebook or whatever it is, we're like, what are we doing with our lives? We haven't ran the last 100 days. We haven't eaten salad for the last 29 days or had a smoothie, for whatever challenge that is the trend right now. And it made me realize like how much that messes with my sense of time. And I suddenly have all of these competing voices in my head of like, no, this simple life that I'm leading isn't good enough unless I am drinking a Green Goddess smoothie for 21 days in a row. Right. That's, I need to be more regimented or disciplined or whatever it is about these completely arbitrary things.
It's so fascinating that you say that, because I feel like I really had a different idea of time during lockdown. I think for that very reason, because it took away from me the pressure, because you couldn't leave, you couldn't go outside. The right thing to do was be home. And so now you have these large swaths of time. And I was able to use that time, I think, to become a much more reflective, like I had never spent so much time filling up spiritually as I did during COVID. Because suddenly I had like time in the morning to just for silence, for spiritual reading. And the shift I felt was like when that spiritual when the spiritual became my priority instead of something I was making time for, like suddenly that was at the top and everything else was under it. Time didn't feel to me like an enemy. Like it really felt very expansive. Like, okay, it felt like now to eternity, now I have like, I don't know how to explain it, but like, here's this blank canvas, and like what the best priority is every day is to just put on that canvas as many warm connections, kind words, little peaceful creative acts. And that was very, even in the midst of all of the uncertainty, that felt very grounded.
Did you feel that way in the, like, while that was happening, or was it more, like, is it more looking back that you can recognize that? I'm curious.
I definitely felt like it was new to me in the moment. Like, I think that that's when I first realized that a quiet time in the morning, or having time for silence and spiritual reflection and reading and journaling, wasn't something just to make time for. Like, that needs to come first, and everything else in my life.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Like, to me, it was like tapping into discernment.
Yeah.
Like, all of the things I didn't know what to, like, how to find balance or what to do next, I felt like when I was using time in that way, I was tapping into a discernment I don't have when I don't do it. And then I find I'm flustered and don't know what to do with my time. Do you know?
Yeah.
So that was the question I was going to ask you, is like, as soon as things open up again and like, you know, it get busy again, it's like those earthly cares, they creep in, and it makes it hard to come back to that spiritually healthy view of time.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had a somewhat different experience of the pandemic, just because I had some major life changes going on that were really difficult, and that on top of that pandemic were causing an extreme amount of stress. And so I appreciated like the slower pace of the pandemic, but it pretty much got sucked up in absorbing the stress I was going through. But lately things have calmed down the last 6 months or so, and I've been able to lean into that a little bit, although I've just really struggled with burnout from it all. And one thing that I've sort of stumbled into that I'm like still figuring out, and so I haven't really started talking about this. I want to focus on this a bit on my own podcast, but it's still like, I'm still trying to figure it out. Anyway, I've stumbled into keeping Sabbaths, on a weekly basis, and I didn't start doing it because, it's sort of a spiritual practice or anything. I needed to stay away from like work and digital stuff for like at least one 24-hour period every week, because I was really struggling with burnout. And so that's what it started with. And it's kind of just expanded into this like weekly ritual where it's kind of like what you're saying, but on a weekly, like that, you're talking about like your morning prayer time. And this is like, I'm getting the same benefits from just stepping away from the expectations, the sort of worldly flow of time for one day every week, and like really focusing on Christ and just everything, I don't know, like a much calmer tempo of life. And it's like been life changing to not exaggerate. I didn't think it would turn into this big thing in my life, but it's now something I crave, and it gives like a shape to my whole week, and it helps me make better decisions my whole week, because my whole week is like leading up to this time when I know I'm going to have to step away from everything. Everything like that I've decided to step away from during that time. And like I said, I haven't quite figured it all out, like why that is and what a Sabbath even means and stuff from a spiritual perspective. But
isn't it interesting?
It's been really incredible.
When you make a decision to do that, like keeping Sabbath days like that, stepping away from all the craziness, you have to give yourself permission and know that it's okay. Like other people may not be doing this; they're just going all the time. It's okay to stop, right? Mm-hmm. So you're giving yourself permission to do that. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know that I had a choice. Like I said, I was really, really struggling with deep burnout. But you don't know when you make a choice like that if it's going to do anything or help or anything. And so it's still very much an act of faith. And I'm really grateful that it's like just how restorative it's been for me.
I think the word
it's almost like God built the entire universe on, a 7-day cycle in which we get one day to step back. It's almost like it's, inherently sacred.
Yes, and I love that you use the word, because you said crave, like you started to crave it. And like that's so familiar to me, in that like it shifted my idea of prayer from being something that like, okay, I have to do this. I am expected to do this. This is the right thing to do. instead of something that I craved to do, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. You know, like,
Yeah, it's like actually nourishing. It's like eating
Yes.
or something, like eating a good meal or
yeah, like it's
I don't
not
know.
like, I'm not saying I want to be right. I want to be healed.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and it's I think that's a beautiful idea, and I hope that you do expand on that, because I'd be interested to hearing more of your experience with it.
I hope so. You know, one of the things that we hear a lot in our community is that feeling of being behind. Like, I have all these tasks and all these goals, and it kind of harkens back to what you were saying about the smoothie challenges and everything on social media. But this feeling of constantly being behind and behind and behind. What would you say that we need to do to make peace with that feeling?
Well, it's hard to give like an across the board thing, because I think that feeling can come from a lot of different places. And sometimes when I have that feeling, it's really, there are really some priorities that I've either been neglecting or I need to reevaluate in my life. But one thing that is helpful for me is a quote that I forget who said it. He's the big minimalism guy, has a podcast, and
Cal Newport?
it's a famous
Greg McEwen.
possibly one of those. I don't know.
Yeah, probably Greg McEwen.
But he says that minimalism isn't owning less stuff. It's that it's letting stuff not own you, something along those lines. And I think when you apply a sort of spiritually minimalist attitude towards time, there's something similar at work. It's not necessarily doing less stuff. Sometimes, like, there is a point at which you literally have to decide, like, to do less, because there are only 24 hours in a day. But many people have kids. They have the things that they're having to decide between are all or mostly non-negotiable. But it's the attitude of not letting the ways we pass the time to own us. And so, like, for example, okay, I have a weekly podcast, and it's really hard when I have something like that or a priority to not commit myself, like, emotionally to it, such that it, like, defines me. Or if I don't produce an episode 1 week, or it's a little off or whatever, that I start to feel that creeping anxiety of either being behind on an existential level or not living up to whatever standard I think I need to live up to. And that's a sign for me that that thing is starting to own me, that I'm letting that thing own me. I'm identifying it with it in a way that is I almost idolatrous, to not put too fine a point on it, but I do think we form these sort of little idolatrous connections with, like, a ton of stuff in our lives. And it's not necessarily those things that are bad. It's the sort of way we allow them to take ownership of us and take ownership of our identities. That's the problem. I don't know that there's a way to stop that other than to allow ourselves to not have to be measured by these things.
It reminds me of several months ago we did like this a deep dive into this idea of existence versus possession, and it was something I had heard when I couldn't sleep one night, and I was listening to Prayers by the Lake, and I was just so struck by it. And I always thought of, like, existence is just being. Okay, it's not holding, it's not possessing, the possession of their ideals or expectations or even opinions. And now you're saying even how we can, it may include the things that we are possessed by. Whereas existence is abiding. And to me, it's a letting go. And, to approach our goals in that way, in our responsibilities in that way. Because I totally know that feeling, that creeping anxiety, when you're kind of wrapped up, your identity's kind of wrapped up in the accomplishment of this thing. And it really, I don't know how else to say. I mean, it steals, for me, it steals the joy of the thing I'm doing. Whereas if I could just be, and let go, give what I have to it, but it doesn't take up more. I guess the main thing is my whole identity is Christ, right? I mean, all my worth, everything.
It's so true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't want to keep advertising the Sabbath idea, but but I don't let myself on Saturdays do anything that is building up to anything. So I don't let myself produce content. I don't let myself work on stuff for my job. Anything that has an outcome that's tied to a sense of identity or professional purpose or anything, I don't do any of that. And sometimes it's really hard if I have a creative idea or some kind of inspiration or energy or whatever. It's but I don't. And I really think it's so helpful to have times like that where we intentionally look away from those things, because it's a constant reminder that we were time was given to us to use. It's not we're not bound to these things. That's not what makes us who we are.
Right. I think there becomes a point too where we're spending our time on things and we're putting the pressure on ourselves to spend the time towards these things because we think that people have expectations of us, and those expectations start to be a burden. And to be able to release that on the Sabbath, so it goes far deeper than just getting a creative thought and writing. It goes to the point to where we have to let go. If I didn't write down this thought and I can't remember it again later, I don't have the opportunity for people to, I don't know, what am I trying to say?
Well, we talk about that a lot. And I totally know what you mean about not wanting to disappoint.
Yeah, not wanting to disappoint people who have expectations of us.
Right. And kind of making peace with that
as
well.
And when you have a weekly podcast, I mean, that's difficult. It lights a fire under you, that not letting people down. So allowing you that rest is really important.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that we talk about in coaching, when I see coaching clients and stuff, and there's always a tension between wanting to take notes in the session of stuff they're thinking about and learning, but then to really have a good coaching session, you really have to be present. And so if you're taking notes, it can impede all of that. Anyway, one thing that I tell my clients, and that I believe is true, is if it's a true insight, it will stick with you. If it's a true insight, you won't have to write it down. And if it's something you don't remember in 2 days, barring any cognitive impairments that or true memory disorders you may have, it wasn't a true insight, or it will come back to you when you need it again. And I take a lot of comfort in that myself.
Yeah,
it's very freeing. And it's a very freeing thought. And like you said, it's a leap of faith to do it, I think. And the thought of it, so it's you want to give yourself permission. You're can I do this? That's how I feel can I really do this? And you can.
Turns out you can.
You can do it, but it's you have to be, not everyone else is doing it, so you have to be okay with the fact that you are doing it. And
in a way that works for you. It doesn't have to be the way even people who are doing it are doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Nicole, I think we're out of time.
That is a lot to think, good things to think about.
A lot of good things to think about, and we've enjoyed you spending time with us. Can you just let everybody know, again, your podcast name and where they can find you in case they want to get in touch?
Yeah, the podcast that I host is called Time Eternal. It's on Ancient Faith Radio, or people can find me on, I'm most active right now on Instagram and Twitter, and my handles on both are @Nicole Roccas. And you can find me on my website at www.NicoleRoccas.com.
Great.
That's about it.
Well, thank you so much. That was easy. Nicole Roccas, your name.
Yep.
So good to have you here. God bless, and I hope we get to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole.
Bye.
So that was really good. I'm really glad she came on.
Yeah, I've been wanting to have her on for a long time, and so did not disappoint.
No, did not disappoint.
Yeah.
I think that one of my biggest takeaways was that at times I think I look at time as performance time.
Yeah.
And it's limited, and it's meeting expectations, and it's stressful.
Yeah.
And how much can I get done? Mm-hmm. Right? And it's okay to step back, because eternal time, you look at this finite time we have here on earth, and it's just a glimmer, of the history of all people and all earth and all creation. It's just a glimmer, and why are we clutching onto it so tight?
Yeah. Yeah, and even, when she was talking about, she used the strong word of idolatry.
Yes.
Even for some of these expectations. Mm-hmm. And, it made me think about, we talk a lot about productivity, but when can productivity become idolatry?
Yes.
And I think that's an important question to ask, and maybe in my mind to maybe replace the word productive sometimes with fruitful. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I don't get confused, because I think that you're right. I mean, she's right that because we're online so much, we do see so many people accomplishing different things, and you can't help but to internalize and kind of put that pressure on yourself. Like you see that and think, I need to do that.
Yeah.
And that becomes our idea of being productive, something that is really outside anyone's ability to accomplish in a 24-hour period.
Exactly. Exactly.
Where I feel is fruitful is something that allows for more being. Fruitful is something that can be flexible, mm-hmm. and it can be present, mm-hmm. with the people that you are with. So anyway, I could think initially after hearing this, things I'll probably be thinking about throughout the day. Yeah. That was kind of what stuck with me.
I keep thinking that too, like just relax. Mm-hmm. Things will happen when they're supposed to happen.
Yes.
Just relax. There's this huge fear out there of being thought of as lazy.
Yeah.
Or thinking that, you're lazy or unmotivated or whatever. Very few people are like that. Mm-hmm. I think that mostly we just need to all relax.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about relaxing, one of the things I think we need to relax is being worried about our body image, what other people think of how we look, comparing ourselves to other people, and that's what we're going to be covering in our Healthy Body segment. Krista Fedorchak is an Orthodox Christian, a wife, and registered dietitian offering faith-based insights into caring for body and soul alike. Informed by the non-diet, intuitive eating approach and rooted in the wisdom of the ancient Christian faith, Krista works together with clients on a path toward healing their relationship with food and accomplishing health goals through small, sustainable life changes. Hello, Krista. Welcome to the Filled with Less show.
Hello, Cynthia. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. It was such a pleasure to interview you on my podcast. I knew that you needed to come on to the show because we started talking about something on the podcast about body positivity, and there was so much more that we could say, so we're going to go into that in depth today, okay?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Good. So I'm first of all, I'm wondering, when you start speaking to a Christian who has a negative body image, where do you start?
Sure. Well, I start with acknowledgement, right? This is tough stuff. Our society does not make it any easier. It's also normal for our body image to be a fluid thing, right? We have good body image days and bad ones. And to know that you're not alone in this struggle, and there's freedom through Christ. There's freedom there, so we can try to tap into that. Next, I would invite this person to get curious, right? What messages have you internalized as truth over time, and where did these messages come from, right? Beliefs of our family, friends, teachers, coaches, social media, images that we see every day, experiences from a young age. You know, I was speaking to one of my patients who's in a larger body, and we were talking about her exercise history, and she was relaying to me all the times, or all the different sports that she's played over her life. And later in the conversation, I referred to her as an athlete, and she paused and she said, "Wow, thank you. No one's ever called me an athlete before." And you know, for her, maybe one message she internalized over time was that athletes look a certain way,
Sure.
right? But perhaps the image is not so much about what our body looks like, but what we can do in it, right?
Yes.
What we can do. And so when thinking about these messages, these truths that we've internalized, we can then compare it to our definition of what a positive body image is. What does that look like for you? Where would you like to be? And then we can remember that God has a say in this too, right? He has something to say about this. If we go back to the creation story, we are made in God's image and likeness. And so pursuing that image might not be building something new, but uncovering and returning to the image of Christ that's within each of us.
Yeah. And, you know, I always think about when we know that we were created by God and that our bodies belong to Him. I like to talk about self-care, right? Because when I think of a healthy body image, I tend to think of health, not what you look like. So I'm wondering, when you're talking to a Christian about self-care, taking care of that which belongs to God, how is that different from the whole secular notion of taking care of ourselves?
Yeah, great question. Self-care seems to be a big buzzword these days, and I think there are various levels of understanding here. I think the surface understanding, or the image that might come to mind for some people, is bubble baths and massages, right? This time you set aside for yourself. And it's not necessarily what self-care has to be. There are several dimensions to wellness. Some people have seen that wellness wheel or the wellness pie, the different dimensions: physical, emotional, mental, social, spiritual. There's a lot more. Mm-hmm. And there are practices that the world recognizes as good and helpful, right? We have self-care recommendations that are supported by research, things like eating well, getting good sleep, moving daily, setting aside time for meditation or self-reflection, going for walks, making time to connect, really connect with others, not, through social media, but the genuine face-to-face connections and interactions. And then we can look at the wisdom of the Orthodox Church, and the meaning of these self-care acts just deepens to an incredible level, right? Going for walks becomes communing with nature and communing with God's creation. Eating well means eating foods that energize us instead of weighing us down, so that we can do God's work. Meditation and self-reflection becomes following a prayer rule, and becomes an opportunity for repentance, right? And why is this important? Well, Cynthia, you alluded to it in your question, right? Our body belongs to God. And St. Paul gives us a bit of the why here in 1 Corinthians. He writes, "Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own? For you were bought at a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit." So there's this connection with body and spirit, undeniable. And he reminds us of our Christian purpose, to glorify God, to give ourselves to Him and to others. And so self-care in the church, I think, is a way to fill our cups so we can give to others. And self-care ends up not really being about ourselves, but about God and His will for us.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking I think a secular self-care ritual tends to be all about us and what feels good, and not about being our best as the way God created us to be, and how to show up in this world in a way that glorifies Him. That's definitely not the secular view.
Absolutely.
Well, when you run into patients who are typically comparing themselves to other people, how do you talk to them? I mean, people who struggle with comparison, because, I know I do it. I think everybody does it. And I think we're brought up to compare ourselves to what's good or bad, right or wrong. But how do you talk to people about that?
Yeah, so there's a common saying, comparison is the thief of joy. I think some people have heard that. I also think it's the thief of gratitude. And when we covet what others have, it really blinds us to our own blessings. I had a patient in a larger body who was struggling with a poor body image. She went on to receive bariatric surgery, weight loss surgery. And she lost over half of her body weight, right? Total transformation of the body. She still did not like what she saw in the mirror. And we had some more work to do, right? And it's this reminder that body image is not about changing what our body looks like, but affirming our beauty, our unique individual beauty given by God, right? That we are created by the Creator, and working towards a transformation that aligns with our calling, which is to be more Christ-like. And He becomes our point of comparison, right? He's our true measuring stick. God became man to show us what that looks like. And when we start worshiping not the created beauty, but the Creator of that beauty, that's our goal.
Yeah, definitely. I think that so much in the world, has started with radio and television, and now, of course, it's internet and social media. It's just pushing that comparison factor at us all the time, and we just have to keep going back to Scripture. And I think on a daily basis, for some of us, just keep giving it up to the Lord and confessing that we're not living in gratitude for who we are and what we look like as He created. We're trying to be something we're not sometimes.
Yeah, I love your reminder to always go back to Scripture, right? We have such wisdom right at our fingertips, and one piece of Scripture I didn't mention here, but I think really applies, is Psalm 139. You covered me in my mother's womb, I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And remembering that, right, how intimate a God that we have. Yeah,
and we were made in His image, and that image comes in all shapes and sizes. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Krista, thank you so much for being on the show today. We really enjoyed having you, and I hope to have you on again someday, because I know there are so many topics we can talk to about diet and all kinds of things that you specialize in. So thank you once again.
And I was honored to be here. Thank you, Cynthia.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. I think this was such a great topic today to talk about body image, because we hear so much, especially with young people who are comparing themselves to others, and you just hear the sad stories. I know that when I was growing up, I was super thin, and I was called a lot of names, twig and all kinds of stuff. And it's funny how you put so much stock in what these other kids have to say about you and what they call you. And even now, as an adult, I have, even in my tennis circle, I have adult women calling me names. So, but at some point you have to separate what other people think of you from who God made you to be. Did you have any of these issues when you were growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I grew up, I was in college in the 90s, and it was like those low-rise jeans, and like there's a certain style, kind of grungy, and I really wanted my body including even like, I remember I had really curly hair, and that was like the style to be like, stick straight and everything. And I wanted it to conform to what was popular at the time, and being really frustrated and feeling like I would even punish my body for disappointing me in that way, like depriving it of, a certain amount of calories, or a lot of negative self-talk if like I gave in to a craving or something, or like you're shopping with friends and you notice what size jeans they're picking out, and you're like, well, mine are bigger than that, and it really does, it messes with you. And there's a disconnect there, like your body, instead of being, it's like something separate from you that you're trying to control, and but later on I felt like I really softened to my body as, I had 4 kids with this body. Yes. It's been good to me. It's helped me, live a life that I have found to be very meaningful and beautiful. And I don't take for granted now that I am getting a little bit older, that I can wake up and take a long walk. Those are things that you think when you're young is going to be forever. You're always going to have the energy to do that. And now I know that it's not just a given, you have to get the right amount of sleep. You have to work your muscles. You have to fuel it well. And I just think that I've been able to see it with a lot more loving gentleness than I did when I was younger.
Yeah, because it is, like you're saying, it's more about health.
Yes,
and the
absolutely.
ability to do what God brought you onto this earth to do, and to have the babies, and to clean the house, and to enjoy life, walk, and do all these things. It's not about what you look like. And it's so funny because I think we might be singing to the choir a little bit, because we all turn to Scripture. I'm pretty sure everyone who's watching or listening to this knows that they are a child of God, created in His image. But the secular world just keeps pounding on us, and we have to fight back and have those boundaries to where we're not comparing ourselves. Right?
Yeah, I think it's important too like for me, I have daughters now who are 20 and 16, and how I talk about health, they are listening, and how I approach my own body, what I say about body image, I always have to be very aware, how to really encourage being a good steward of this gift that God has given us, without crossing the line into an obsession with, it looking a certain way, to celebrate the beautiful body God has given you by taking the best care of it that you possibly can.
Yeah, and I really admire the way you're raising your daughters, all your children, from a Christian point of view, and I know you were raised the same way in a Christian home. I think many of us, some people may be listening, who grew up like I did. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. My dad was, how do I say this? My dad kind of raised me, and my mom to a certain degree, to judge my worth by how I looked, especially to the opposite sex. So I was supposed to look a certain way, because I saw that that's what my dad valued. And it definitely wasn't a Christian upbringing. So I just really admire the way you were brought up, and the way you're in turn bringing up your kids. And I just pray that everyone who's listening, even if they were brought up a different way, that they can do a 180 and make sure that their kids are growing up with a good body image.
Yeah, it's tough out there. I mean, like you said, there's, unfortunately, because so much media is apparent, just working against you with filters being used, to actually alter the body and presenting this image for all of us that is impossible. It's an impossible image.
It's an impossible.
And so I feel like I'm always fighting against that, to be able to, speak the truth about beauty. to myself included,
Yeah.
you know, and having to really resist that message that, you know, it's not even real. It's false,
Yeah,
you know.
it is.
And the interesting thing to me, Cynthia, is, you know, when I talk to someone face to face, when you get to know a person, they are not just their body. They are so beautiful.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, and I think so much we are focused on first impressions. You know, what do you look like to somebody, having not, you know, any kind of personal one-on-one exposure to them.
Yeah.
You know, when really beauty is drawn out from when you know a person.
Yes, it is.
And that's something that stuck out to me when I was doing photography, that one-on-one, when you spend time with people, the beauty of that person, regardless of their size, anything about them, really comes out from conversation, and the sparkle in their eyes, the love in their hearts, and, you know, it's something that comes from love.
Yeah.
Love makes us beautiful.
Yes.
You know, not what size we are, for sure. Yeah. So
I
thank
agree.
you for bringing her on. That was
I
your
agree.
idea, and I think it's a really important reminder
It's a
for
good
all of
topic.
us.
Well, for the next topic, we're going to start talking about our lives. And Molly, with your kids, do they ever come to you and say that they're bored?
Oh man, yes, yes. Especially when they were younger, that would always be the dreaded, "Mom."
And yet you knew there were a ton of things they could be doing.
Oh yeah.
Well, adults go through the same thing. They get bored with their lives. So we're going to talk about how to be productive if you feel like you're living a boring life.
So today's community question is, do you have any ideas for me when I feel bored?
So some people may think that this is a funny question, and other people may definitely relate to it. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is, oh my gosh, I know I have 100 things I could be doing at any given time, and yet I would have to say there are times when I'm bored. And a lot of times I think boredness goes with loneliness,
Right.
too. It's easy to be lonely and bored. So I looked up the definition of boredom. The state of feeling disinterested in one's surroundings, having nothing to do, or feeling that life is dull. So it's not like when your kids come up to you and say, oh, Mom, I'm bored, because they
Right.
really have no clue of what they could be doing.
Right.
It's an outlook on life a lot of times.
Yeah, I think that definition does make you think about it a little differently. More like we talked about, a vague discontentment with your life, with
Yes.
your day, with your time.
Yes.
And that is something I think universal that we've all experienced.
I think so. And I think that a lot of times when we're going all the time, sometimes, hearkening back to what we talked about earlier about happiness, the happiness just sort of seeps out of our life, even with things that we used to find brought us happiness. I'm in a course right now with Dr. Ivana Popa, which I think Dr. Popa will be on our show next month, God willing.
Wonderful.
But she has a course right now. It's a renewal in action course, and it's caring for the caregiver. It's a beautiful course, and she'll tell you more about it next month if she's on. But at one point in the course, we had to come up with things that we felt made us happy so that we could make sure they were incorporated into our lives. Well, this can sound pretty easy. Oh, yeah, this makes me happy. But it was actually a little bit difficult because things that used to make me happy don't make me happy any longer. So sometimes you kind of have to dig deep to bring that spark back in.
Yeah, and be intentional about figuring it out, because I know for myself, when I'm just kind of reactively responding to feelings of discontentment, I can choose things without even thinking that not only don't really quench that thirst for something bigger, they actually cost me a lot of money. Because I think so oftentimes when you have that vague discontent or that disinterest, we think I need something new
Right.
in my life.
Shopping.
I need to go shopping. I need to pick up something at Target. I need to look online. And we end up spending a lot of money we don't have on things we don't really need that get us quickly back to where we were before of that same feeling.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that. You bring up shopping because shopping used to make me happy. Shopping doesn't make me happy any longer. So
Yeah.
as we evolve, like you're saying, through life, we have to look at different things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I know we came up with a list, right?
We did. We came up with a list of 25 things.
Things that each of us had said that we turn to, you know, when you're just feeling like, what's something that's going to give me a little boost? And I really like this list because I like having ideas. And I forget that sometimes it doesn't take very much for
Right.
me, you know, like some of the things on the list are like going to the library was one of mine. One time I went to the library and got a beginner's book on knitting. And just like, oh, I'm just going to try my hand at a scarf. Or sometimes I'll go and get a recipe book and I'll take that home. And like that's actually pretty fun for me. I mean, I really enjoy that. And I think having those things to kind of spark ideas is really helpful.
Yes, I think so too. So we're not going to spoil a surprise on what these 25 things are. We actually have a free PDF resource on our website at filledwithless.com. So just go to our website and you can download that PDF for some ideas. And who knows, they could help you, your spouse, your children, could help a lot of people. I think there's some good ideas on there.
Yeah, absolutely. I did have another thought on it.
Oh,
though.
yes, please tell me.
Well, you know, as much as it's good to have these ideas at hand, I do think there's something valuable in experiencing that type of boredom. And I think a lot of times it's an invitation to sit with it and to dive a little bit deeper. And, you know, I was telling you about my experience at a monastery.
Yes.
My first time going to a monastery, and we went to, it was like a 3-hour vigil. And that first hour, feeling like I was going to crawl out of my skin because I was so restless. And suddenly I felt so tired and like I felt itchy, and I was really having a hard time focusing. But because it went on so long, after about an hour or so of that, I really settled into it and found that I kind of went deeper, like dove under that surface level mental chaos into this placid depth of my soul in which I was just kind of lost in the experience. And I was really struck by that, how so many times I don't give myself enough time to sit with it, to kind of plumb those depths.
Yes.
I try to escape it with any kind of a distraction, and how much I might be missing out on in terms of peace, clarity, enlightenment, you know, because I'm, instead of waiting for those answers or digging through and getting to the underside of all the chaos, you know, I'm just filling my mind with busyness that gets me nowhere.
Right, right. And you even mentioned earlier that you cleaned your house recently without any music,
Yes.
without any, and we're always saying, you know, to make things more enjoyable or pass the time quickly, listen to a podcast, listen to some music. It's wonderful, but sometimes you just need that silence. You need to be able to sit and plumb the depths.
And I think it's not, like, I love podcasts and I love listening to Audible, but I do think it's something worth practicing, like from time to time. Like this Friday, I told you, yes. So I did all my house cleaning, challenged myself just to not listen to anything, just to let my mind wander. I prayed, you know, thought about things, and again, just kind of found myself getting into the rhythm of the cleaning and using my senses and being aware of what was around me. And I felt like it was a really profitable exercise. Yeah. So it's not that, you know, there's the balance. It's never all or nothing, but just being able to kind of balance your life in a way that you are allowing room for that kind of boredom, I suppose, but but making peace with it and actually letting it help you become more placid.
Yes, exactly. And if you're able to do that, I think you come out the other end more productive because you've just figured out some things about yourself, some things about your life, and some things you want to change going forward.
Yes.
I mean, really, it opens up possibilities.
Absolutely.
Yes. So we've come to the end of our show, but as you know, there are several ways to keep in touch with us. One, of course, is our course, 6 Weeks to Sanity. It's been going strong for over a year now, and everyone who is jumping into it is enjoying it and knowing that they're learning life lessons that will last for the rest of their lives. So we hope you enjoy the course and that you join us there. And of course, for the first month when you're in the course, you also get complimentary admittance to our membership. So you're able to be with us in a community of other people who have taken the course, and then you can see how we all support and encourage each other.
Yes, and speaking of the community, that's the second way that you can stay in touch with us. Now, this community is very special to me. These are women that we've really gotten to know and love over the last year or so, year and a half or so, and it's just a space that we are constantly encouraging each other to pursue peace, pursue calm, pursue growth and joy regardless of what's happening around us. And we provide teachings, we bring in special guests, we cover topics that are very reflective, very practical, and it's just it's really a great supportive group to be a part of. So that's the second way.
It really is. And actually, so we told you about our deep dive for July. It was on happiness and bringing happiness into our lives. In August, we did a decluttering challenge, actually 4 decluttering challenges throughout the month that people could opt in or opt out of. And then next month, spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about journaling and leading people through some journaling practices, prompts, etc. So you'll want to join us for that. And then last but not least is our book club. As you know, we're reading Hind's Feet in High Places. And this book is, I think, just life-changing, which I hope is not an overstatement. But I truly, if you can't join us in the book club, at least run out and get the book, because I think you'll truly enjoy it. Recently, I came across a blog post, and the author was talking about how she's been reading this book every June for the last 20-something years. And then she goes up on a mountaintop, she hikes to this mountaintop, and contemplates all of the lessons in the book. It's just truly beautiful. I wish I could do that too.
Yeah, no, it's a great way to reflect on that. It'd be so powerful to do that.
It would be, for sure. So with that, we hope you join us in either the course, the membership, or the book club, or feel free to just sign up for our weekly wellness newsletter that'll come to you every week if you're not already getting it. And just stay in the loop. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, because we create a lot of content that's purely to help you live more enjoyable, peaceful lives, because I think that's what God wants. And He gives us all these ways, all these people in our lives to bring us into peace and joy, and we want to help cultivate that with you. So with that, we'll catch you next month. God bless.
Take